So we've already had a look at all the different phonemes in English and the various ways that you can help your learners to make these sounds. But just as important is what happens when you put the sounds together into connected speech, and it's something that's often ignored by English teachers, connected speech, but it can make a real difference to whether your learners first of all sound intelligible, but also whether they sound natural or not. So let's have a look at the various aspects of connected speech in English. The first thing is word stress, and word stress is absolutely crucial to understanding because English listeners, native speakers, listen to the stressed part of the word to make sense of it. I had a learner once who said to me that she was going to do the enrollment for her son, and I simply couldn't understand what she meant. She said it lots of times. Eventually we worked out, once she'd written it down, that she meant enrollment. Now if she'd said to me enrollment with the correct stress and even missing out the L in enrollment, I'd have understood what she said. So helping your learners stress word correctly and become aware of word stress is absolutely crucial. Let's have a look at some examples. You have some words in a word family: transport, transportable, transportation. What I'd like you to do is to try and work out which is the stressed syllable in each of these words. Is it the same for each word? And if you're not sure, play around with saying the word. So transport, transport, for example, and see which one sounds right to you. Another thing is to look at the difference between the way we write words and the way we say them. So if you look at vegetable, Wednesday, probably, have a look at how many syllables they have when they're written and how many you can actually hear when they're said aloud. So stop the video and have a think about this before moving on to the next slide. So where did you put the stress? I'm sure, like me, that for transport you put the stress on the first syllable. It's transport, trans is longer and it's higher in pitch and it's louder than port. You move to transportable, then it's por that takes the stress, and transportation, it's te that takes the stress, and the other three all have the stress on the first syllable. These great little rectangular marks here are a good way to record stress when you're learning a new word. So I definitely encourage you to help your learner always put the word stress on any word that has more than one syllable. But where the stress goes isn't the only thing to consider. Let's look at the three last words: vegetable, Wednesday, and probably. Now, vegetable and Wednesday, if you look at the syllables, vegetable and Wednesday both automatically miss out one of the written syllables. You don't say vegetable, you say vegetable, and you don't say Wednesday, you say Wednesday. Probably is a little bit more problematic. When you say it by itself, you tend to say it with three syllables. But often in speech, for example, I'll probably see you tomorrow, you'll hear that the b bit gets lost in rapid speech and then it turns to two syllables, and that can be quite confusing for learners. So it's worth also being aware of where the silent syllables are and how they can change in rapid speech. Just as important as what happens in the stressed syllable is what happens in the, particularly to the sounds, in the unstressed syllable. Let's look at some examples. You have some words, transportable and transportation. The real difference here is that whereas the stress in transportable is on the por, it isn't in transportation. Similar with photograph and photographer, the stress is on the first syllable in photograph, but it isn't in photographer. Say these aloud and listen very carefully to what happens to the vowel sound in each of these pairs of words. So what you'll have heard is that in the unstressed syllables, transportation, the sound stops being the full sound and becomes this reduced sound, which you find very often in English in unstressed syllables. If we look here, particularly here, you'll see that transportation actually has two of these unstressed sounds, transportation, and photographer has three, 1, 2, 3. This sound, which is called the schwa, is the most common sound, the most common vowel sound in the English language, and appears very frequently in unstressed syllables. So you can see how difficult this makes for learners who are trying to learn how to spell something. If you just hear photographer and you don't know how to spell it, how can you possibly guess? So that's another thing to make learners aware of, this schwa that often appears.